welcome to our webinar, Lunch and Learn, on putting together classic awards. My name is Eva Kaiser, and I have been both an winner of Classics Awards, but also a judge for Silver Anvils. And with me today, I have Joel Swanson, APR Vice President of Marketing from Affinity Plus Credit Union. Welcome, Joel. And then I have Megan Weber, Senior Vice President at Carmichael Lynch Relate. So welcome both of you. Um, we are recording this so that anyone who doesn't join us today can look at it later or in the future. But today we're going to discuss putting together award entries. And I'll start with Joel, if you want to introduce yourself and your background.
Sure. Well, you did a pretty good job already there, I think. But so I lead marketing, which includes communications for Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union. And I have also had an extensive background working with Eva in an agency years ago and other corporate events. So I've been in a couple of different of the different types of industries, that submit awards, and I've won, dozens of classics over the years. I didn't even count them up, but for different work at the agency level and at the corporate level. So can talk a little bit about all of the above there.
Megan, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Megan Weber. I'm a Senior Vice President at Carmichael Lynch Relate. I support both our home and design as well as our food and beverage clients within the agency. And I've worked at Carmichael Lynch Relate for the last 9 years, previous agency experience before that time while living in New York City. And we submit a lot of Classics Awards for the campaigns that we work on. And I help teams facilitate those entries year after year. And I've also served as a judge for a local chapter that we have exchanged entries with for previous classics. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much. We want to make this as interactive as possible. With a small group, if you've got questions, just either raise your hand or just put it in the chat, because we want to answer the questions that you have and get you into developing your classics entries. But we've got some list of questions, and at any point, if you've got a question or you want to comment, raise your hand or put it in the chat. So we had this prep call last week, and one of the biggest discussions we had was why enter or create an award. Some people say, "Oh, why are you doing that? That's just for getting an award," but I think it's more than that. And I let kind of Joel answer from a professional and personal and a corporate perspective. Why enter awards?
Sure. Well, and we still do. So at Affinity Plus, we've entered the last few years, and it's been an important thing. So I'll give you a few reasons why, and the cases you can make to your bosses. Usually, that's the thing justifying the expense, right? Of time and the entry fee, to your bosses who might not be marketing and communications people. So one of the reasons, number one, I think, or not in any priority order, but first one that I'll talk about is just the morale piece of the team. We spend so much time doing, getting things done, trying to generate meaningful results. Eva's in my favorite old phrase. And we spend so much time doing that, we often just move to the next thing. And this is the chance to do a retrospective and celebrate and bring your team together and have them go out and have a cocktail and celebrate some of your best favorite work together as a group. And there is a lot of value in that, just from a team morale standpoint, especially in this hybrid world we live in now, where if you're like my team, where we used to be in an office every day all together, and now we're rarely all together. And we're, a few are in the office and the rest are working from home. And some of my staff I only see once every month and a half or two. So it's even more important to have that. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is that I would say is it's a great strategy for retention and for becoming an employer of choice, where people who, in our world who see that are going to want to go to places, especially achievement-oriented people who want to do cool work. They're going to pay attention when they see who's doing cool work, and winning those awards is one way to highlight cool work. How else do you know what some of those other groups are doing? So those are a couple that come to mind.
What about you, Megan? What's the value for doing it from an agency standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing on what Joel said, a lot of the same sentiments. I think it's a really great way to acknowledge and recognize the achievements of your team that worked on a really successful campaign. And I also think from an agency perspective, we don't enter all of the work that we do in award shows. So having your campaign selected to be entered just by agency leadership means that our leadership team feels like the campaign was worth the industry recognition, which I think leads to helping employee morale. And as from a personal perspective, I like to highlight awards that my team has won on LinkedIn. I think it showcases the type of work that we're able to do or that I'm able to lead as a leader. So that's one thing that's important to me. And then I think from, a company perspective, it's a great way for us to talk about those award wins through our internal communications channels. And as an agency, it's also something that we use to talk about in our new business efforts. And once those award entries are developed, we also have tools that we need to develop case studies for those campaigns, which can be used on the website, in new business, as I mentioned, or for other uses.
Thank you. I think for me, award entries, putting them together helped me get my accreditation. It helped me not only train myself to think strategically and think about how to position a campaign, but it also gave me the portfolio I needed to defend for my accreditation. And as I pursued my fellowship this year, having these award binders at the time or summaries helped me put together my case for becoming a fellow. But from the very first standpoint, doing award entries gave me some self-satisfaction and belief in myself as I put them together and saw what I did and created the summary that I could showcase to my boss. So when I won that award, I could say, look, well, I won an award. How about giving me that promotion I wanted? It's a way. And then also when I did apply for other jobs, I could say, and I won these awards, and here's the case study. So it's not just from a company standpoint, but it's also from a personal standpoint as to why you should invest in doing an award. Anything else on that? I mean, there's so many reasons to do awards. I love the hardware. I should have had my hardware with me down here today. Um, so we talked about the value from a department or company perspective. But could you share your experiences on crafting an award entry, PR award entry, and what do you think sets it apart from other ones that are successful? I'll start with Megan.
Sure. I mean, my first tip is always to integrate your objectives into your results to show how the campaign performed against your goals. So for, an example, if a goal of your campaign or objective was to secure at least 1 billion earned media impressions and 1,000 placements, literally bring those numbers back into the results section and compare those apples to apples to the placements and impressions that you achieved. I guess a second tip that I have before I pass it off is I like to integrate a photo or a media outlet logo and headline directly into written award entries. So even though they're only 1 to 2 pages long, if the space allows, I do think that it's really helpful in addition to your supporting documents to have something visual in that written entry to help it stand out.
You, Joe, what's your experiences in doing this? Is there one that stands out?
Sure, great stuff. Well, my favorite one, Eva, that I'll bring up from our agency days was the Go Girl one, but because that also won national awards like sabers and bronze anvils and things like that. So that was pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of cool ones that stand out over the years, in particular, the ones that made a difference for the client, right? So the Go Girl one was about a product that, and won't get into it, but it's a product that a surgeon had created and had spent 20 years failing to find a market for it. And we helped find a market and turn it into a business for them. And that was kind of fun. And highlighting some of that uniqueness and some of that, what's the business result? Well, what's that story behind the business result? That story sold a lot of the award entry. Otherwise, the rest of the award entry is about how we marketed a product that basically allows women to go to the bathroom standing up, which could go a horribly not so pleasant direction as far as the story. But the origin story was really powerful of what he was trying to accomplish, and in doing this, and it was an homage to his mother, whom he had to help when she was sick and aging, and I mean, just all kinds of great stuff. So infusing a little bit of that story where you can, whether it's the origin story, whether it's something in the creation story, or the impact story of what it accomplished for some of the end users, find where there's a compelling component of the story to infuse in. Now, granted, you don't have a lot of space, right? So you can't tell the whole, lengthy narrative, but if you pick some piece of that to include, that's usually pretty powerful. Another thing I would say about entries that stand out, entries that do well, especially when I've judged them at the national and other chapter level, is I look for ones that provide the strategic context. And this is another great reason for doing entries is it gives people at earlier stages of their career a chance to identify, articulate, and connect with the broader strategy, the business strategy, what else is the advertising group doing, the digital marketing group doing, the sales group doing, whatever your industry is, and bringing it all together, because I think that's critical for these entries, even an elements entry, even if you're just like entering a brochure or an annual report or a video, one piece, having a little bit of that context and spending some of that real estate of your entry talking about everything else that was going on that this was part of shows that it was a strategic component of something bigger. And I have found the entries that do best tell that little bit of story of, oh, this piece fit into a bigger whole, and how it fits together, and it was coordinated and all that. You don't have to go into all the detail of everything everybody else did, but at least making sure that you reference it so that it's part of that context, I think is critical. And those are the entries that I think do really well, where they show they understand their place in a bigger strategic initiative.
Great. So one of the things you said reminded me that another reason why you should do award entries is from a company perspective as to developing your staff, using it as a way to really develop their ability to look at things strategically and to tie to the business results. So in terms of the storytelling, Megan, what do you think are some ways that are good to start the story and tell the story in the award entry?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm working on an award entry, I always like to set up the challenge and the opportunity, and then start integrating into the other sections of the entry. So a lot of this we're doing in retrospect when we pull these together. So I always like to start with like the recommendation that we put together for the campaign for clients, as well as any results documents that we put together, really to help, weave that story together.
Say that the headline also matters. A creative headline can start telling the story before you even get into the narrative. I know that just saying, a project that increased awareness is not going to be as exciting as, you know, bringing standing peeing to the masses or something like that. I don't know what the title was for the Go Girl, but use that headline, the title, to really start to set the stage for your award entry. Is a thing there. So, Joel, what do you think about storytelling? What are some of the important ways that can make the narrative compelling?
Well, and I mentioned some of them before, right, in the previous answer, right, about, find something in the origin story or the creation story or the impact story to share some of that. And ideally, and I hope I'm not stealing some of Megan's thunder, but she said this in our prep call too, and I do the same thing, of including some visuals. Sometimes that visual can be a chart of, oh, we went for one client that we won some awards for, after several years of 1-2% growth, so we were able to impact 16% and then another 12 the next year. Okay, that in a graphic is pretty powerful. So those kinds of things. Or sometimes we'll do a testimonial too, where you put a picture of a customer and the impact it had in their life and their, whatever it was. Or the client, if it's the client, saying something, where you make that into a graphic. So including some of those visuals, or the logo of if you made it on Good Morning America, having the logo and Kathy Lee, on the whatever. I remember doing that once for one of the Go Girl ones, and those things help. I mean, those visuals can tell more of the story, or at least the emotional part of the story, at a glance, as opposed to more space. You'd have to spend more space in words to try to get that same impact.
Okay, I want to jump off our list of questions here, but ask a new question for the two of you, or mostly just really for Joel. You've worked in corporations and nonprofits. How is doing award entries different, the process or putting them together different for them than when you were at an agency?
Sure. There's definitely a difference because at the agency side, you're not an internal group. You don't have access to everything. So, unless you're doing it in partnership, like co-creating the entry, you have limited access to what happened. And you have to work a little harder sometimes to connect it to the organization's whole and get some answers to, hey, I know we're not your agency for this, but what else did you do, with this other agency? Or how did you do this internally? Do you have any metrics for that? And hopefully some of that was shared along the way, but sometimes you need to go back and try to gather some of that. And it's a little harder effort if you're not the internal person. And some of those things were done internally or with a different external group. But you still want to try to connect the whole. Here's the overall of what we were trying to connect. On the agency side too, I think there's a little more competition, a little more sense of winning, and a little more of a template for how a lot of these look the same. I think there's a little more stress in how do you stand out, because they're all serving clients in similar ways with similar services. So how do you stand out? How do you do that, from a agency standpoint? And that's where, you were mentioning the headlines are pretty important. Yeah, you've got to show off a little of your creativity and stuff in your putting together of the entry itself. And I think there is just a little more pressure to figure out some ways to stand out, and a little more pressure for some competition, because you're competing against some of those same agencies for the very business you're getting awards for, and that you're submitting for. And so I think I mean, for me, when I was on the agency side, there was a little bit of that reality too of, why did so and so win? Our project was better than theirs, and I think on the corporate side, there's less of that, because it's not like every other credit union is submitting in the same category. I'm competing usually not against other credit unions for an award. I'm competing against, other types of businesses.
And you mentioned the template. There kind of is a formula for putting together award entries, and like learning how to write a news release or anything else, reading other award entries is a really good tool in learning how to see what that template is. And really, the template falls along the lines of your introduction, your summary, your planning, your research, your planning, your implementation, and your results. Um, um, the PRSA.org has, if you remember, has a list of a file of award-winning silver anvils that you can review and look through and see the process. I always think it's useful if you find one that's similar to have it next to you as you're writing yours to get some ideas for that. If you do not have access to those, please send an email to the Minnesota PRSA and I will find some for you and send them to you that fit your industry. Because I think it's helpful to have the kind of the templates to look at. Now, I think one of the biggest things is we talked about objectives and tying those objectives to your results. Um, what are some of the common mistakes peer professionals make when they're preparing the award entries, including specifying on the objectives? Megan?
I mean, I've seen people not include anything tangible in the objectives. It'll be like drive impressions and placements. Well, how many? What was your goal? Because if you can show that you met or exceeded those more tangible goals, and show some of those business metrics, I think it helps articulate the success of a campaign. So as Joel was saying, traditional PR metrics are a really good indicator of success. It's the impressions, it's the number of placements, the percentage of placements that might include a brand image or links to a website, for some of the more traditional classics categories. But As much as we can show also that some of our campaigns contributed to sales goals, built brand awareness through third-party studies, et cetera, it can really help your entries to stand out.
What are some of the common mistakes that they make, and how can you kind of help them avoid them?
I mean, like I said, I think the common mistake when you're working on the objectives is not including like actual numbers and results. I think that's one. I think another is um not having clear research that ties to, pop culture, third-party studies or data, or internal brand data. I think sometimes when people are drafting an award entry as well, people are not um including information on the target audience, which is really, important to the reader of the entry, and understanding who this campaign was actually meant to target, and then see that pay off in the results of the placements that were driven.
As a judge for awards, I really like to see how the research influenced the planning. Like if you got all this research, let's say you did secondary research, you did some primary research, how did those results help you with your planning? And I think that we often overlook research that we do as typical things. Like we evaluate what the competitors did. We look at what else is happening in the market. We do a Google search. Those are all secondary researches that we can include in saying, we did an examination of the marketplace. That counts. I think we overlook things that we do traditionally as not being research. Anything you want to add on research, Joel? You're nodding.
Oh, my point. I'm nodding because you just
Oh,
totally sniped my point.
sorry.
That was awesome. No, that was great. But I do think that's an important point is a lot of these things we do that aren't captured, like the research stuff, like you said, very rarely do we have a program where there was a delivered research report. It happens. We do get some of those in some bigger ones, but a lot of times the research was done, I don't want to say informally, but sort of along the way without being captured as a separate thing. We'll still summarize that, give some bullets on what you did and what you found out, like you said, what you found out that was important for the strategy. And I think that's important. And I think it's the same thing on from what Megan said on the how do you reverse engineer some specific measurables? And I have literally, so I've done this for some of my Affinity Plus ones where, I have internal clients, internally product owners who don't always have written goals, right? They don't always have numerical goals. And so I'll often go back to them, even if it's after the fact and say, okay, I know we did this. We needed to grow something. You didn't have a specific number. What were you hoping for? Would 10% have been, and I actually will seed them with some ideas and say, yeah, actually in my mind, I would have loved it if we'd have got to 10%. I'm like, okay, was it less than that? Or should I say 10%? I mean, I will literally query them. I'll play a little bit of investigative reporter to get the truth out of them and be able to put that in the entry. And that counts. I mean, I think that matters. There was something in somebody's mind somewhere while we're doing this. And sometimes you do have to ask some deeper questions to just get at that. And if that's happening after the fact, as you're putting your entry together, so be it. Still counts in my mind.
To Megan's point about target audiences, if your research, like let's say you do a small focus group with 10 people in your target audience, and they tell you that they get their information from Snapchat or Instagram, that's going to lead to your planning and how you're going to get to them. So that's a good thing to know as well. It could be about the target audience. Don't forget that how you reach your target audience is important. Um, I think just to jump to objectives, as a judge, if there is not a clearly stated objective that follows the SMART objective standpoint, I don't give it full credit. So think about really like what is your objective and how is that objective different than your strategies? Just like when I teach college, there's some confusion oftentimes with what the objective is and what a strategy is. So make sure you're stating what your objective is, not your strategy, and you clearly articulate what your strategies are. And if you're alone and working in a solo practitioner, or you're in a nonprofit and you're the only communication person, PRSA has tons of resources just to talk to them and say, hey, can you look at this for me? I mean, I would be happy to do that, as what I think Joel and Megan as well, if you need some help looking at your objectives. But that's really important to set the stage for the rest of your award entry. Any other common mistakes or tips you have to share, Megan?
I mean, just in terms of common mistakes, we've already talked about having a tight story. You know, I also think that like polishing or proofreading your entry is really good before it's submitted. And one thing I do is I'll have someone else that did not work on or support the campaign read the entry internally before it gets submitted. And really, that person can say, is this story clear? You know, as someone who doesn't know anything about this campaign or initiative, am I selling this in the right way, to make sure that what I'm submitting is as strong as possible?
Joel, any thoughts?
Just sometimes it's valuable too to break out objectives a little more by audience, by segment, I mean, by certain things too, and where you can, where you have them. And I think sometimes for the audience section, sometimes we forget to include the insights that are related to, well, who is it our business serves, period, or that business serves, period. Because you know, they sometimes they have a customer base that has a profile or a couple of profiles, and we forget that, you know, that's at such a high level, it's so baked into everything they do that we forget to articulate that in the award entry to say, oh, we actually serve this age group or people who are in this situation. And like with Affinity Plus here, you know, we have a certain sweet spot of a group, a certain couple of segmentations from the mosaic segmentations that we tend to focus on. And I try to make sure I include a couple of those bullets every time to say, hey, here's who we're trying to reach overall. And you know, don't forget that you probably have some of that as the business does, even if it's not related to the specific initiative.
I would say that I also, one of the things that I look at when I judge in terms of target audience is if you list a target audience, there should be a strategy or a tactic that targets that specific audience. So if you list an audience, make sure it's tied to an activity. Don't list an audience just because it's there if you didn't have any activity for it. I would also say that we live and breathe inside our organizations. And what may seem common and obvious to us, you need to restate for the judge. The judge may know nothing about your company or what it's like to live in Minnesota. So you need to state the obvious so that it's not just assumed. Um, Also, we live and breathe everything and we love every detail of our campaign, but not every detail needs to go into the award entry. You can edit out things that don't support your campaign. Just because you have it doesn't mean you need to include it. So be a tough editor on yourself to make sure that the story you're telling in your award entry is very compact and flows without any extra little roads and detours.
So when
I
you're
guess
talking about editing, oh, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, okay. Just one more tip that, you know, that made me think of is, you know, even if you enter a category like media relations, if you achieved a great social result that was tied to the campaign, like you don't just need to stick to exactly media relations. Like I think it just, as Joel was saying earlier, shows a stronger entry if you do have the ability to pull in some of those other marketing levers. So, um, you know, think about how you can push, you know, you got to stick to the category that you're in, but like think about how you can push beyond that to make a stronger entry as it makes sense.
Right.
I just had a really like tactical thing that I've come across over the years, and I thought I would bring it up here because we're in a PR field. I know people who will ding entries if they're not in AP style, written in AP style. Like that's not my organization style unless it's a news release. But if you're doing a broader piece that's not just about media relations, I have erred on the side of putting it in AP style just for those PR practitioners who and Eva, we both know one in particular who was militant about everything needs to be an AP style. It's like, well, technically that's not true. Anything going to the media needs to be an AP style, but there are some people who are locked into some of those profession-based standards, right, of what they're looking for. And that was one I've come across that I just sort of make sure that my entries are in AP style, just because that seems to be the common default for our industry.
Say though that if you're running short on words or character counts, I would do the number two rather than spelling it out. It's two characters
Yeah,
that counts. Um, as a judge, and I'm going to jump onto our judge question. Some of the best award entries I've seen, and I give them points for, is if they have encountered a obstacle they didn't foresee, and they or had something happen that they admit that. Like, here's the challenge we didn't plan for that we had, and here's how we addressed it. Or if they had an unforeseen result, and then how that result is influencing what they're going to do next. So we know that PR is an ongoing thing, especially in an organization like a nonprofit or a corporation, where things are going to roll over. It's not a linear campaign that stops and ends. So what we learn from this, we're going to use next year. Those are the kind of little insights that make the judges see and feel like you understand the process and that you're moving forward. It's that evaluation at the end. Also, little extras are good too. And we got to meet, this person or this led to this. Those little insights are very helpful. Any from a judge's perspective, ideas that you have or tips, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also just to say something different, like don't sleep on the supporting documents. I know we tend to spend a lot of time on the 1 to 2 page entry and getting that perfect, but that's only part of the entry. And the judges want to see that rounded out through the supporting documents, whether that be through like great visuals, links. So don't sleep on those.
Also, memos that you maybe had internally, or other or recaps, or your media list. The worst thing that can happen for me is if I'm a judge and I go look at supporting materials and there are none. They're just a clip report. That doesn't do it for me as a judge. How about you, Joel?
No, those are great suggestions. I think the supporting materials are a good one because that's an opportunity to go deeper on some things too. Like, oh, what else was going on with related to the bigger context? Oh, well, here was the advertising plan. Here was the here's the website. I mean, some of those other components you can put there again, showing that how, even if it was a tactic, even if it was one media release that you're entering, it's having all of that context, I think, helps and shows the strategic value that where this fits into the strategy and how to connect it to the business measures that are important. So I think that's helpful. I think from the judge's standpoint too, you need to make it easy to call out the things that you think are the coolest or the big things. Don't be shy. And I know there's different feelings on bolding things, underlining things, calling things out. But I would say you can't go crazy, highlighting every other thing. But if there are a couple things that you think are the things, make sure that stands out and that it's clear to the judges. This is really cool. We don't get this in our industry ever, kind of metric or whatever. If something is really special, make sure you call it out somehow.
Now, we had a debate earlier about budget. Some organizations have huge budgets and some have little itty bitty budgets. Um, from my perspective, I believe that listing your budget, especially if it's small, is a really benefit for you. Because one time I judged the Victoria's Secret's Runway Award for Media Relations, and they had a TV show, and the clip book was about this thick because everyone covered it because it was women in lingerie, and their budget was unbelievable, like unbelievable. And I was like, oh, so of course you got this much thick coverage from this budget. So if you have a small budget, I would, really lean into all that you did for that budget. And there, some people say, undisclosed budget. That's kind of a tweak for some of the judges that I've seen. They're like, well, why couldn't you share the budget with us? What is it? Do you not know the budget? Was it so big that you get the small result? I mean, the budget needs to align with kind of the results you got. Um, from an internal perspective, Joel, you had a perspective on how you list your budgets.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can use ranges. Sometimes that would be acceptable, and I'm okay with that if they're nervous. But I know I don't accept the sort of excuse where it's proprietary. Well, we don't share that externally anyway. I mean, that doesn't go out in the news release or anything like that. So there is a sense of privacy around some of those things that are like protected or proprietary or whatever. But I think I think it is important to do that. Often what I will do is I will put, is there a specific budget that's just out of pocket? Say that and say, hey, out of pocket was this, plus there was some agency time. Or if you do have the agency time, I think it's okay to put the whole budget. If usually when I'm working with our partners, they will put together a scoping document for a project. Well, you need to put that and call that out. And I think that's totally appropriate to do that. And it's a way, to get around, sharing anything proprietaries if you just limit it to a certain type of budget where you at least share what you can share.
Mhm.
So Megan, do you run any trouble with your client saying, oh, you can't share the budget? And then how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, from an agency perspective, typically we will share a budget on award entries, but we'll just mark it not be published. I think we push our clients to understand that like a budget is needed to like evaluate or help evaluate the success of a campaign, but a lot of our clients don't want their competitors to know how much they're spending, on a marketing PR initiative. So we just add that little not be published tag typically. And then we typically do involve both the fee and out of pocket expenses incurred to execute the idea or the initiative. But we do typically mark that it is both fee and out of pocket because we know that there might be some, in-house entries coming in that are only that out of pocket, whereas there's a time investment that's implied, but we just make sure to mark that it is fee and out of pocket because sometimes our budgets from an agency perspective look a little bit higher.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the things that go into the award entry. Um, but to paraphrase a friend of ours, results do matter. So how do you present the results? What's the best way that you find to do that, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, as I've mentioned a couple of times, I always tie them back to the objectives. I try to get sales goals and metrics whenever possible. And one thing that I've started doing recently is include my best result last so that it's the last thing that the judges read as part of my written entry. Again, just to try to make it more memorable and not buried within the entry.
Joel?
One thing that I appreciate is when you answer the so what question as part of the results, right? So I got 4,700 clips. Okay. Is that good? Is that, what did you get in previous years? Or, what do you get when you don't do this extra initiative? So a little bit of that editorial comment of what it means is important, I think, like best results ever, or, whatever it might be, or it's like increased our share of voice by 20% that quarter, or, whatever you've got that you can measure to include some of that, where it's not just the number, but give me at least try to give us a little statement of what that, putting that in context of why that's significant or what that means if you can.
So what are some of the, besides, your clip reporting and traffic to a website, what other kind of metrics do you see are good to use to support your objectives?
Yeah, I mean, if your campaign was trending on social media. I know in the past we've included if it started trending on Twitter, for example, and really became part of that conversation. If there was a contest or a sweepstakes involved, we might pull in the number of entries that we were able to drive or achieve. As I mentioned, some of our clients do frequent brand awareness studies with a small group of people. And sometimes we're able to see and understand, like, did brand awareness increase by 1 or 2% during the time window that this campaign was running? Or if there's a campaign spokesperson, that metric is easier to reference. But like, those are all things that we try to get from our clients with their approval, of course, to pull into the results section in addition to those more traditional PR metrics.
What about you, Joel? What are some of the metrics that you have been using?
It depends on the call to action, right? So, I mean, what is it you're asking them to do? And I'll give you a couple of examples. One that where we had to play a little bit of data detective. We did a campaign early last year to immigrant populations here in the metro, and because when things come into our applications, there's no way to designate that or talk about that. But one way that I was able to look at that is I called our call center people and I said, well, did you see an increase in requests to the language line and certain languages and things like that? And sure enough, they had some of that data. So just asking around for, based on the call to action, where might there be some even correlative data that you could say, hey, yes, there was a bump during that month, so we were able to achieve something there. The other thing is, get used to UTM codes. If it's a lot of our calls to action are digital, right? And pretty much anything that we do now, whether it's in our email marketing or text message marketing or digital marketing or social media, now has UTM codes where we can track all the way through to completed applications. So pretty much anything we put out, if they're coming to a landing page and if they're ultimately doing an action, we have worked to make sure those UTM codes are on content that goes out digitally.
Great. So I asked the audience, is there any results that you like to share or or tips you like to share with the group? We're welcome to have you share as well. I know Leah has done an award entry or two in her life.
And judging, yeah. No, and sorry for my tardiness. I had a client meeting added to my calendar this morning. But yes, Megan, I appreciated what you said about having someone else review and proof your entry. Like, it's just kind of a credibility thing, right? If you start to see typos, it's like, oh. So that's just kind of an overall tone thing from me, judging. And I loved your tip too about having somebody who didn't work on the campaign review it to see if it makes sense, because hopefully it makes sense to you, right? You worked on it, but I think having that outside perspective, that's probably a good litmus test when we send these entries or share these entries with other chapters. And I appreciated the call out of beyond Minnesota, right? It's typically another state that's looking at this. So I thought those were all good tips. So sorry, I guess I'm not adding much original content, but just saying what I heard was really good. So thank you.
Thank you. So as we start pulling together your award entry, some of the tips are to gather information. What other tips do you have on starting the award entry, Joel and Megan, as we pull up the tips for classics entries? Getting started, what's your advice, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I may have mentioned this earlier, but I always start with the recommendation that my team initially pulled together for the idea, and then any sort of recap or results. And I think that those are great places to start, particularly if it's a campaign that hasn't been submitted in the past. If it's a campaign that we execute every year, and we build on our results, or the tactics may change a little bit. One thing you can also do is just collect things for items needed for the award entry as you go, so that it's less of a time impact when you do start pulling that award entry together.
You, Joel, how do you get started?
Yeah, no, I like what Megan said about the along the way thing. So one thing that I have done for programs that I know are going to, that there are things that I think are going to be award worthy is I'll actually put subfolders in those folders that say research, planning, implementation, results, and make sure that I dump stuff during the course of the project, whether it's copying it so that if it's also somewhere else as part of some other construct for documentation, that's fine. But then I have, a place where I can copy it also so that when it's time for award entry, I just got to pull up those folders. I used to back in the day do that physically with the old manila folders, but now most of that stuff is online. You have digital copies of, I'm guessing, I mean, for 90 probably percent of stuff. So it's more a matter of putting it there so you can just go look it up.
I just had when you thought about gathering materials is when you have the implementation section, which we really didn't highlight on much. You don't want to spend all your time on that, but what you can do is let's say you list your tactics. Um, Put a copy of that news release in the supporting material. Put a copy of that briefing book in the supporting material. So use the supporting material to augment the space you have to talk through your implementation. I think timelines are really important too, saying how long that you had to do this campaign, and how it phased out. Because if you have a small budget and it's done in 30 days, those gonna look really good to the judge to call it out. But if you have a huge budget and you have 18 months, it probably won't be as impactful and exciting to the judges as would be, small budget, small timeline. But make sure if there's any bumps in the way that you share those as well. So here's some tips for classics entries that I gathered from around the internet and put it in one place. Um, but I think the first thing you need to do when you start thinking about your award entry is seeing what category you want to put it in. Many awards have different categories. Aaron, if you want to switch to the category listing, here are the categories that we have for the elements. Elements are different than the campaigns. Elements are basically a tactic that you use to support that campaign. So this year we have 12 categories, and some of them are broken into smaller budgets or smaller employees. If you are doing the PR tactics category, really play up your award entry with creativity. So make sure you call out why this was creative and make sure you use supporting materials to showcase the creativity that you have. Special purpose publications could be annual reports. They could be special brochures, things like that, sustainability reports. Multimedia is more along the lines of a website or things like that. Influencer engagement is a newer category, but you want to be sure to include your budget in that one to showcase how much you're spending on your influencers. Newsletters are very traditional. Media relations greater than or less than $20,000. You've got speech, feature writing, and public relations writing, digital execution, brand research and insights. This used to just be research, but this is where you can have your brand research and insights. Social media, creative tactics, content marketing, and social content series. The thing with this is if you put together an award entry for a campaign, which is the next slide, you may be able to pull out some of the elements and use the elements as well. So kind of repurposing for the most part your award entry for a program. So programs are community relations, virtual events, public services, marketing, reputation management, internal com, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and integrated programs. Now, while I've not seen this, I would encourage you if you do a campaign and there is a DEI component, call that out because that's a trigger for judges to say, okay, they're looking bigger than just their campaign, their program. They're thinking about it in a broader community sense. So if you have DE&I aspect, I would encourage you to pull it out in your award entry. Any thoughts on categories, Megan or Joel?
I don't think so. I think sometimes we have things that would fit multiple categories, and we really, sometimes reference back to past award entries or what's one and say, where could this entry be the strongest? So that's one thing that we do at the onset of deciding what to enter and where to enter it.
Yeah,
often see people enter in multiple categories too. Go ahead, Joel.
yep, that's what I was going to say too. I like sort of diversifying my portfolio for better returns, right? By having the same entry in multiple places where it fits. I think one mistake I've seen in doing that though is oftentimes people will just copy and paste the exact same entry with a different title, or with the same title even, and just updating the category. And the problem with that, what you need to do is focus a little more on what's that category about. So there is some tweaking you can do. It's a lot less work, but it's still, you should do some work and not just put the same 2-page summary or 4-page summary over and over again.
To that, if you take a program and then you pull out your element, your tactic, and enter that, pare down the parts of the award entry that aren't relevant to your campaign. So I mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not my area of expertise by any means, but we do have Marcia Pitts Phillips on the call, who was a national DEI chair. If you want to chime in on that award category, Marcia.
Yes, thank you very much, Eva. And I just actually was seeking just a little bit more clarification around the DEI category. So for example, does it mean whether an agency or an organization, nonprofit, name, fill in the blank, are they doing a project for whether it's an ethnically diverse or other underrepresented communities? Or is it a category for a project or a campaign that is specifically aimed at raising awareness about diversity, equity, and inclusion? So that would be helpful to get a little bit of background.
So it says on the award entry, any type of program, institutional marketing, communications that seeks to ensure fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness in access to information and resources for all. The program also seeks to demonstrate culture of belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. The program can be external and or internal communications. I don't know if that helps you clarify, Marcia.
Yes, and we can talk about it a little bit more, but thank you so very much for putting that in, Leah. I really do appreciate it. But when it comes to DEI overall, in terms of PRSA, we do what this category, the descriptor of it, yes, it does speak to that. But from a national DEI perspective, district, and all the way down to the chapter level, we do seek as a society to ensure that DEI is, or DEIB, if you may, is woven into all of the various components of a campaign, regardless of whether it is for internal comms, community relations, public service. I'm reading off of the slide because PRSA with the DEI National Committee, that is the goal, to ensure that there is representation across all aspects when we talk about DEI. I hope that that is helpful.
Thank you. So one last piece of advice from Megan and Joel before we jump off, because Megan's got a meeting at 1 o'clock sharp. So Megan, final advice.
Yeah, I think we covered most of what I was going to say for this one. Just, tap those internal resources, use awards that your organization may have submitted in the past, see what won, and use those as a jumping off point for any new entries.
Thank you. Joel?
My piece of advice would just be, don't self-censor. If you think something, if you're proud of something, find a place to enter it for an award. Even if you don't win the award, you've put it together now in a nice case study that can be used other places. So if you're proud of the work, we should be going through as a profession those kind of retrospectives as a discipline anyway.
Thank you. So here's the award entry information. The deadline's Friday, February 7th at 5 p.m. The majority of the work must be completed between October 1st, 2023 and November 30th, 2024. We're also seeking nominations for the Padilla Award and Rising Star Award. And as I mentioned before, if you have questions as you're going through your award entry, please feel free to email me. And you can either email me at the information at the Minnesota PRSA office, or I'll put my information into the chat. But thank you very much to Megan and Joel for helping and sharing. And thank you for everyone for attending. Good luck with your classic entries and have a great weekend. Thank you.